unreeled. Vintage recordings of fiction recovered from discontinued physical media.
Twelfth Night. Along the coastline of Illyria, or Albania as it is now, there were often storms. Electric storms, thunderstorms, storms of temper, storms of passion. Antonio, captain of the Duodecimus, knew it all too well, for he had once fought the Illyrian fleet offshore and was a wanted man thereabouts. He would have steered well clear if a storm had not wrecked the Duodecimus on the beaches. It was a nightmare, that storm. Passengers flung into the sea, the ship breaking up around them, the lights of Illyrian houses twinkling above the white crashing of water on the rocks. That pretty young girl, Viola, drowned.
I don't recommend this place, Sebastian,
he told the girl's twin brother.
If your heart's set on looking around, who am I to stop you? Let's go. And don't worry about your sister. I'm sure she's safe somewhere, same as we are.
Sebastian welcomed the reassurance. Antonio was just sorry he could not believe it himself.
Look, here's my money. You can't visit a place without a few coins to spend.
And he pressed all he had into Sebastian's hand. The warmest friendships are often born out of calamity. In fact, Antonio was wrong in thinking Viola drowned. Despite her woman's clothing and the pounding waves, she had reached land. Just as she herself was thought to be dead, she imagined that her fellow passengers had drowned, including her dear brother Sebastian. Now she found herself alone on a strange Mediterranean shore, no place for a refined nobleman's daughter. So she decided to dress as a boy, call herself Cesario, and apply for a post as page at the villa of Duke Orsino, ruler of Illyria. There were at least 2 great houses on the cliff top overlooking the sea. One belonged to Duke Orsino, another, neighbouring villa, housed the Lady Olivia. Now, as Viola quickly found out, Orsino was in love with Olivia, in love with the very thought of Olivia, but most of all, in love with love itself.
If music be the food of love, play on. Give me excess of it.
Sweet agony that it was, for Olivia gave him no encouragement at all. On the contrary, Olivia had sworn to mourn for 7 years in tragic solitude the death of her brother. Undaunted, the very first task the Duke gave Viola, or rather Cesario, was to visit Olivia with a mouthful of poetry to pour in her ear. Viola did not want to go. She did not want the Duke to be in love with Olivia. To her chagrin, she found she was in love with the Duke herself. But she went to Olivia's villa. How could she refuse? And what a houseful of oddities she found there. It was not an easy place in which to mourn in tragic solitude, what with Orsino sending love tokens every hour of the day, and a motley household racketing about the house and gardens. Olivia's uncle, Sir Toby Belch, lodged with her. He was not much given to tragic solitude. In fact, if he had ever met it, he would probably have knocked it on the head, tucked it in his napkin, taken up a knife and eaten it, washing it down with a good wine before falling asleep with his face in it. Opinions of him were mixed. Olivia was fond of him in a despairing kind of way. Maria the maid adored him, and Malvolio the steward detested him. The visiting Sir Andrew Aguecheek looked up to him, except when Sir Toby fell down drunk, of course, when Sir Andrew generally tripped over him. Sir Andrew had hopes of marrying the Lady Olivia. Sir Toby had planted these hopes so as to tap all the money out of Sir Andrew's purse on the pretext of helping him win her. You might almost have felt sorry for Sir Andrew, fooled and fleeced out of his gold, if it were not for the man's quite groundless vanity. Only Malvolio, the pompous, lugubrious steward of the house, made Sir Andrew look good by comparison. As mistress of such a household, the Lady Olivia stood out like a swan among ducks. Viola repeated Orsino's declaration of love and was struck by her beauty. "Make me a willow cabin at your gate, and call upon my soul within the house, write loyal cantons of contemned love, and sing them loud even in the dead of night, halloo your name to the reverberate hills, and make the babbling gossip of the air. Unfortunately, though, Viola was not as stricken with Olivia as Olivia was with Cesario. The lady's resolve to live sad and alone wavered then and there. "Tell Orsino I can never return his love," she said. "Tell him not to bother sending any more messengers, unless perhaps it's you." Viola left, torn between joy and sorrow that Orsino could never win his beloved Olivia. But before she reached the gate, Malvolio came lumbering after her.
My mistress sends back your ring. Don't want it, won't keep it. Sends it back.
And he dropped a ring on the ground. "But I never gave her any ring. Oh, no!" The dreadful truth dawned on Viola. The Lady Olivia was in love with her. Poor lady, she were better love a dream. It seemed as if everyone in Illyria was doomed to unrequited love. Sir Andrew, the Duke, Olivia, and Viola herself. My master loves her dearly, and I, poor monster, fond as much on him, and she, mistaken, seems to dote on me. What will become of this? And soon even Malvolio was to join in the ranks of the broken-hearted. Malvolio was making life a misery below stairs at Lady Olivia's house. He stalked the servants' quarters as if he were lord and master. He preached and pontificated, he bullied and blustered. He disapproved loud and long of Sir Toby and Sir Andrew. When they rolled in at 2 in the morning, roaring and reeling, crowing like cocks and swapping bad jokes at the top of their voices, Malvolio came down and delivered them a sermon like a broadside of cannon. Sir Toby belched in his face.
Do you really think as you're a sober sides, the rest of the world's going to stop enjoying itself?
Malvolio stalked away, vowing to report them to the mistress, chased upstairs by gales of beery laughter. But his tirade had soured the night's fun. Proud Malvolio was ripe for a fall, and if anyone could give him a helping push, Maria the maid was the girl to do it. Walking next day in the grounds of the villa, Malvolio found a note written in handwriting remarkably like Lady Olivia's. A love letter, surely. The writer was clearly urging some secret admirer, in code, to declare himself. Even though you are below me in rank, M-O-A-I. These letters rule my heart.
All those letters are in my name,
cried Malvolio.
My lady loves me. And why not? I've known all along I was meant for great things. Wealth, glory. Now let me see, what is it I have to do to show I've understood her? Wear yellow stockings, yes. Cross garters, yes. Remember who commended thy yellow stockings, and wished to see thee ever cross-gartered.
He read on, believing what he chose to believe, oblivious of the giggling behind the hedge, and of the possibility that someone was playing a trick on him. Viola did her utmost to persuade the Duke that his suit was hopeless, to give up, to love elsewhere. But Orsino showed no signs of relenting. You might almost have felt sorry for him, if it were not for his pig-headedness. Instead, he sent her like a lamb to the slaughter, straight back to Olivia's open arms and adoring eyes. Veiled in black and sighing, the Lady Olivia walked her garden in a turmoil of emotions. It did not help her peace of mind when Malvolio suddenly pounced from behind a bush, plumed like a pheasant, and with scarlet garters crisscrossing bright yellow stockings. He flourished his hat in her face, giggling maniacally, burbling about letters and greatness, and obeying her every fancy.
Be not afraid of greatness. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them.
She was so worried by this apparent mental collapse that she summoned her servants to take charge of him. Eagerly they did so. Olivia did not see with what relish they dragged Malvolio away, or where they took him. She had other things on her mind. If only Viola had admitted earlier to being a girl, but she had left it too late. If she said anything now, Olivia would be horribly humiliated. Cesario did his best to explain that he could not return the lady's love, but Olivia was not listening, did not want to hear. You might almost have felt sorry for her if it were not for that obstinate deafness of hers. The situation was getting out of hand. The lady grew more ardent with every passing moment. Cesario fled those beseeching eyes, those outstretched arms.
I don't know why I stay around.
Sulked Sir Andrew Aguecheek.
Olivier shows more interest in that page boy Cesario than she does in me.
Well then, challenge the lad to a duel,
suggested Sir Toby, scenting a day's fun.
I'll deliver the challenge.
And before Sir Andrew could find an excuse, there he was, committed to a sword fight with his rival in love, Cesario. "Fight me?" shrieked Viola when Sir Toby delivered the challenge. "But I've never done the gentleman wrong. Can't you tell him I'm sorry?"
Only blood will satisfy him,
lied Sir Toby ferociously.
He's a great sword fighter, that Sir Andrew.
"Tell him I won't fight," begged Viola. "I'm not man enough." Sir Toby told Sir Andrew,
The lad's eager and waiting, says he'll chop you in pieces.
Oh, mercy me. Gracious heavens. You mean he likes a fight?
Nothing better. Killed a dozen men that way, I hear tell.
Tirelessly, Toby Belch worked away on the two innocents, persuading them they had to fight each other. Both were terrified, so there was no real danger of anyone getting hurt. It was a bit of harmless fun. Still, Viola could not tell the difference between a coward and a killer, so she fled those bloodshot eyes, that outstretched sword. Then all of a sudden, up stepped a stranger and offered to fight on her behalf. She had never laid eyes on him before, and there he was, ready to lay down his life for her. Fortunately, he did not get the chance, because the local militia arrived and arrested him for being a pirate.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to need that money I lent you,
said the stranger to Viola. "What money? I never saw you before. Of course I'll give you what I can, but—" The stranger seemed unreasonably bitter, quite outraged, in fact, that he was dragged away by the officers, shouting abuse at the person whom, a moment before, he had drawn his sword to protect. It was all very confusing. As soon as the officers had gone, Sir Andrew, egged on by Sir Toby, went in hot pursuit of his rival in love, content now that Cesario was feeble enough to bludgeon. Meanwhile, close by, the Lady Olivia, in search of her darling Cesario, found him right outside the gate. She smiled and touched and gazed with such adoring eyes that Cesario allowed himself to be drawn indoors out of the day's heat. Except that it was not Cesario at all. It was Sebastian, Viola's twin brother. Unaware that his kind companion Antonia had been arrested, or that his sister was enmeshed in a series of terrible misunderstandings, a more bewildered boy never set foot in Illyria. Nor had a more baffled suitor than Malvolio ever banged his head against a brick wall. Locked in a pitch-dark room, treated like a madman, and taunted through the bars of his cell, Malvolio raged and howled like a chained dog. The Scarlet Cross garters holding up his yellow stockings cut off the circulation to his feet. In the morning, his hopes and dreams had lifted him half as high as the sun. By evening, he lay humiliated, incarcerated, and in pain, and half convinced himself that he was mad. What other explanation was there for the love letter, the brutality, the spiteful voices at the window? Sebastian emerged from Olivia's house still bewildered, but engaged to be married. He was sorry his good friend Antonia was not on hand so that he could tell him how this perfectly delightful woman had offered her undying love and virtually begged him to marry her. She had everything, money, beauty, rank, and although he had never laid eyes on her before, it felt as if the marriage had always been meant. Who was he to defy destiny? If only his sister could have been alive to see it. It was at the trial of Antonio, captain of the wrecked Duodecimus, that everything became clear. The arrested captain was brought before Duke Orsino in the town centre, charged with piracy, which he vigorously denied. Viola was there at the Duke's side once more in her role of Cesario. The captain began to rage at the sight of her, calling her an ungrateful traitor.
I rescued that boy from the sea myself. Saved his life. I looked after him and served him these 3 months past. Then, when I come to his aid, a danger to myself, as you can plainly see, he refuses even to know me.
But this boy has been in my service for the last 3 months,
said the Duke.
So you must be lying.
A flurry of movement, a rustle of silk. The Lady Olivia, no longer in mourning, came half dancing through the afternoon shadows. The sight of her robbed Orsino of all self-control. Her casual rejection of his love and her obvious fondness for Cesario pitched him into a violent rage.
I've loved this boy, God knows, past all reason.
He cried, grasping Viola round the neck.
But since he's clearly the one you love most in all the world, why don't I just kill him here and now, to spite you?
He did not mean it, of course, but Viola was almost sorry he let go. She would gladly have lain down and died for her beloved Duke. "Where are you going, Cesario, dearest?" asked Olivia. "After my dear Orsino, whom I shall always love better than anyone in the world," said Viola candidly. Then it was the lady's turn to rage. "What? Love him better than me? Have you forgotten your vows so soon? Is this how a husband treats his wife?" she wailed. "Husband?" She even brought out the priest to prove it. Olivia had just now married her Cesario. That little piece of news set the Duke shouting again, so that presently Viola was being savaged by both a jealous Duke and an aggrieved wife. This was the moment Sir Andrew and Sir Toby chose to stagger into sight, clutching their heads and yowling.
Oh, he hit us! He hurt us! That Cesario, and made us think he was a coward, and all the time he was a vicious brute of...
Cesario did?
All eyes turned on Viola. She tried to deny it. She swore she had never done anyone the smallest harm in her life. Who knows what might have happened if a new face had not come along? It was Sebastian.
I'm sorry, dearest. I'm afraid I've injured some of your household,
said the newcomer to Olivia, sheathing a bloody sword.
But believe me, I was provoked.
They stared at Sebastian. They stared at Viola. Their eyes travelled to and fro like shuttlecocks.
One face, one voice, one habit, and 2 persons.
Viola stared at her twin brother, and he stared at her.
There were 2 of them all along,
said Sir Andrew, rubbing his broken head.
So, when you kept saying you loved me,
said Orsino. I meant every word, said Viola, and the Duke understood why he had always felt such a very strong regard for his little page boy.
Give me thy hand, and let me see thee in thy woman's weeds.
When she realized her mistake, the Lady Olivia had no wish to undo it, and Sebastian certainly did not. It was as if he had stepped into a dream of both a dead sister and a new wife, and had not been required to wake. Malvolio emerged from his underground cell as if from a nightmare. Everyone laughed to see him dirty and dishevelled, his yellow stocking dangling, and even his hair trembling with rage.
I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you!
He bellowed, but they only laughed all the more. You might have felt sorry for him if it were not for his ridiculous pomposity. No, no matter what his faults, you could not have helped feeling sorry for him. Almost. And as Olivia's jester Feste said,
When that I was and a little tiny boy, with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, a foolish thing was but a toy, for the rain it raineth every day. A great while ago the world begun, with hey-ho, the wind and the rain, but that's all one, our play is done, and we'll strive to please you every day.
The Tempest. It seemed to Miranda as if she had lived all her life on this lonely little island. Her father, Prospero, had told her differently, but for 12 years this island had been her home and she remembered no other. She recalled the past like a dream, the people like characters in a fairy story. She and her father had been cast adrift in an unseaworthy ship by her uncle Antonio, who wanted to be Duke of Milan in place of Prospero. Alonso, King of Naples, and his brother Sebastian had both helped set the ship adrift. The castaways would certainly have died at sea, but for the kindness of an old friend, Gonzalo. At peril to his life, he had secretly stocked the ship with food and water. His bravery had undoubtedly saved Prospero and little Miranda, but it was fate which had cast them up on these uninhabited shores. No, the island wasn't quite uninhabited. Before Prospero, it had belonged to the witch Sycorax. She it was who had landscaped it with thorn bushes and bent-back trees, stinking bogs, and naked rocks. She it was who had captured spirits of sky and sea, like a great black spider catching flies in her web, and made them serve her as slaves. When one airy spirit defied her, she had pinned him inside a split pine tree to howl his days away in agony. She it was who had left behind, when she died, her grotesque son, Caliban, to drag his knuckles around the beaches and thickets of the island. But Prospero knew magic too, and the longer he lived in lonely exile, the more he perfected the magic arts. He coloured the island with flowers and grassed over its bare rocks. He hung fruit in its trees and put fish in its lagoons. He freed the spirit Ariel from the split pine tree. He even tried to educate and civilize the monstrous Caliban, until the task proved too hard.
You taught me language, and my profit on't is I know how to curse. The Red Plague rid you for learning me your language.
And all the time, Prospero waited. What was he waiting for? For rescue? Surely not. For though he had been Duke of Milan, here he was Emperor of a magic realm. Then, one night, to Miranda's dismay, Prospero raised a storm. He pored over his book of spells, drew symbols in the sand, milked mysterious magic out of the clouds, and with Ariel's help, raised up such a tempest as the island had never seen before. The heaving sea holed the sky, the pitchy rain mottled the rocks, twisting palm leaves lashed the air to ribbons. Out at sea, a passing ship was ensnared in the storm's centre. Ariel charred it with lightning, clung to its masts in the shape of fire, split its canvas with hail, and blinded passengers and crew with rain. The ship was driven headlong against the cliffs, where it was held in a cleft as Ariel had been within his tree.
Why, Father?
Begged Miranda.
Such a dreadful storm, all those poor people lost. Why would you do such a thing, Father? If by your art, my dearest Father, you have put the wild waters in this roar, allay them.
I have my reasons, said Prospero, allowing the wind to drop. And they're not all drowned. Take this young man coming towards us now, for instance. What do you make of him? Miranda looked down from the dripping doorway of their mountain cave and saw a young man roaming the island paths in a daze of grief. Every now and then he would call out, "Father! Father! Anyone? Is no one left alive then but me?"
What is it? A god?
Whispered Miranda, pressing her fingers to her mouth.
He's so beautiful. Did you ever see such beauty, Father?
She was accustomed to the blue-green feathered loveliness of Ariel, but this was nothing like it. This was flesh and blood. This was a wonder. And yet Prospero did not welcome Ferdinand with sympathy and kindness. On the contrary, he was horribly fierce with him, accusing him of having come to the island expressly to steal it. A spy, he said, a treacherous dog, fit for nothing but a kennel and a stout length of chain. When Ferdinand drew his sword to resist, Prospero's magic robbed him of all power to move. Though Miranda pleaded desperately on his behalf, Ferdinand was shackled like a convict and put to work carrying firewood. Prince Ferdinand hardly cared. He had seen Miranda, miracle of the island, and she had looked back at him with the same love-struck eyes. Nothing else seemed to matter. Ferdinand was wrong to think his father dead. Though Prospero, who had orchestrated every note of the storm, knew the truth, he did nothing to put the boy's mind at rest. Indeed, he had Ariel become invisible and sing sad songs of drowning in Ferdinand's ear.
Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange.
But Ferdinand's father, King Alonso, was not dead. He and half the nobility of Naples and Milan were strewn around the island shore in accordance with Prospero's plan, soaked, exhausted, but alive. Among them was Prospero's deadly enemy, Antonio. King Alonso was devastated with grief, for he in turn believed his son had drowned. His companions, particularly Gonzalo, tried to comfort him by saying that Ferdinand could have swum ashore, but no one really believed it. Some were more sincere in their sympathy than others. For no sooner had the king and Gonzalo gone to sleep than Antonio resorted to his favourite pastime, plotting and murderous intrigue. "If you were to kill Alonso now, while he's sleeping," he whispered to Sebastian, "and I were to put an end to that prig Gonzalo, you would go home from here King of Naples. You're heir to the throne, aren't you?" "Me? Take Naples? Like you took Milan from your brother?" "Yes, and how well his robes look on me." Sebastian hesitated. "I don't know if I could." "Nothing simpler," urged Antonio, insidious and tempting. 3 inches of steel, that's all that stands between you and the crown of Naples. Don't think about it, let's just do it." They could not know that every word spoken on the island rang loud in Prospero's ear. Quickly he sent Ariel to wake the victims, and Alonso and Gonzalo stirred in the nick of time to escape having their throats cut. The murderer's moment was lost. Their crime had to be postponed, and the 4 went on searching for Alonso's lost son. Meanwhile, Caliban the monster was busy cursing his miserable existence when he heard someone coming. He hid, for fear it was one of Prospero's spirits sent to punish his laziness with pinches. He lay down, and that was how Trinculo and Stefano, 2 more survivors of the shipwreck, came upon him. Trinculo, Alonso's jester, looked round for shelter from a fresh burst of rain, and seeing Caliban's cloak, crept underneath it. Stefano, Alonso's butler, had stumbled across most of the island before he came across Caliban. Owing to a lucky find, several bottles of wine washed ashore after the shipwreck, his brains were pretty much afloat in drink. Seeing what he took to be a 2-headed, 4-legged, fairground freak, he generously slopped wine into the mouth at each end. "A most ridiculous monster, to make a wonder of a poor drunkard. Trinculo, this end is you. Stefano, you're alive." "Can I have some more wine?" asked Caliban, and they both jumped out of their wits. So it was that 2 rogues were reunited, and Caliban discovered a taste for strong liquor. He thought it so marvellous that he was ready to bow down and worship the godlike creatures who gave it to him, ready to serve them with slavish devotion, to show them his island, to let them have it, if they would just kill Prospero first. His head reeled with the drink. His fish fins slapped like a performing seal's as he thought of dancing on Prospero's corpse. He should have known that every word spoken on the island could be heard by Prospero. Prospero sent Ariel to accompany the trio's drunken singing on pipe and drum, and the music impelled them to dance, like it or not, through thistles and thorns, pits and ponds up to their chins. Even so, he could not remove from their hearts the determination to kill Prospero and take his island from him.
"Be not afeard. The isle is full of noises, sounds and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that, if I then had waked out a long sleep, will make me sleep again."
Please sit down and rest. I'll carry some of your logs. Let me, but please rest. You look so tired.
"I'd rather my back broke under the strain. And anyway, how can I be tired when you are here to keep me company?" Prospero smiled with delight as he watched, unseen, his daughter and Prince Ferdinand. It was impossible to tell which of them was the more in love, and nowhere in the world could you have found two more admirable young people together in one place. He had planned their meeting from the very beginning, and had treated Ferdinand so cruelly, only to test his mettle and be sure of his worth. Now he put an end to their distress, wrapped Ferdinand warmly in his arms, and granted his wish to marry the beloved Miranda. "She will make you even happier than you suppose, boy. I've had her by me here for 12 years, and I know her for the perfection she is." Then he entertained his visitor as he would have liked to have done from the first, with hospitality and friendship, and with a masque or play to celebrate their forthcoming marriage. Though it was an illusion, acted out by shadows, a prettiness which faded like a rainbow after rain, Ferdinand and Miranda were enchanted. Only Prospero could not derive any pleasure from his own magic. Inwardly, he was seething with rage at the thought of Caliban, evil, ungrateful Caliban, urging along his worthless conspirators bent on bloody murder. Together with Ariel, Prospero loosed the goblins of the island to kick and prick, pummel and pound the three drunkards. "Go charge my goblins that they grind their joints with dry convulsions, shorten up their sinews with aged cramps, and more pinch-spotted make them than pard or catamountain." It was as if Prospero hated Caliban for being a hideous brute in his beautifully crafted paradise. Ariel, the instrument of Prospero's revenge, began to feel sorry for his master's victims, not Caliban, but the nobleman on whom Prospero was now wreaking revenge for his 12 years' exile. But he obediently carried out Prospero's instructions. Prospero prepared another masque, taunting Duke Antonio, King Alonso, Sebastian and Gonzalo with visions of banquets which disappeared before they could taste the food. He had Ariel trap them within the thicket of saplings, powerless to move and forced to listen. Their crimes cried aloud through the tree-trunk bars of their cage.
You, Antonio, you, Alonso, you, Sebastian, we know you. You are the sinners who usurped Duke Prospero and sent him and his little innocent daughter to their deaths in the heaving sea. You see, Alonso, how you have paid for the death of a child with the death of your own son. That's right, weep for your crimes.
"Where are they now, Ariel?" Prospero asked.
"Where you told me to put them, master, and so miserable that, if I were human, I would take pity on them."
"You would? Then so shall I, my faithful Ariel. I promised you your freedom if you served me loyally, didn't I?" At the mention of freedom, the blue-green feathers fluttered like a sea-bird hovering over the sea. "I shall keep my word soon. Release my enemies and bring them here." With his staff, Prospero drew a magic circle on the ground in which to pen them a while longer. It was dawn. The first warmth of the day touched him, and Prospero unfastened his magician's cloak at the throat. The mystical signs woven into its fabric glistened and flickered. His mane of white hair made him godlike as he stood overseeing his island kingdom. And yet he leaned heavily on his staff as he addressed one last time the spirits of the island. "Goodbye to you, wraiths of the rock pools. You ghosts of the green sea, you woodland sprites. My magic has given me such mastery that I could eclipse the sun or waken the dead to dance. But all that is finished now. Men are not gods, and if they try to be so, they become tyrants. He let the cloak fall from his shoulders. He broke his wizard's staff and, fetching his book of magic from the cave, he hurled it down into the sea. The spine burst, and its pages hovered on the rising air like 1,000 gulls. Ariel brought all Prospero's enemies within the magic circle. They looked up to see, white-maned and king-like on a high promontory, the man they had thought long drowned in the sea.
"Prospero! Prospero! Prospero! Prospero!"
They all gasped. "Yes, Antonio, Alonso, Sebastian. I am Prospero, the Duke of Milan you cast adrift on the open sea. I have tormented you for it in body and mind, but now I forgive you. All I require of you is the return of my dukedom." "Oh, it's yours!" exclaimed Alonso. "Every brick and pane of it. This last storm's taught me that a dukedom's nothing to lose compared with a son." "You must be patient in your loss, Alonso," said Prospero sagely. "I myself lost a daughter in last night's storm, but I have resigned myself to the loss." "You did? Oh, heavens! How?" Then, seeing that Alonso was truly a changed man, Prospero drew the curtain which hung across the mouth of the cave. There sat Ferdinand and Miranda playing chess. Alonso's amazement was matched only by Miranda's when she looked up to see her empty world suddenly populated by so many human faces. Ariel, obedient to the last, lifted down the ship from its cleft in the cliffs, and woke the sailors who, all of a while, had slept a magic sleep below decks. The voyage of the Duke of Milan and King of Naples, interrupted by the tempest, could safely continue. Even Stefano and Trinculo, pinched and bruised, fell aboard at the last moment and lay in the bilges howling. Fair weather and a safe passage were the last gifts Prospero was able to pluck out of the treasure chest of magic. After that, all he could give Ariel was his freedom. All he could give his daughter and son-in-law was his blessing as a father, and all he could give his subjects in the dukedom of Milan was the wisdom of an old man. Caliban was left alone on his island. No one remained to torture him with pinches or force him to carry firewood. No one remained to call him vile and hideous. No one remained for him to curse or envy or hate. But there again, no lovely Miranda remained. No magic to paint the air with music. No one to blame for the day's disappointments. No one to rouse tempests out of the sea. No one at all. Sometimes, in the blue-green season of the year, he would glimpse Ariel riding on a snatch of wind, or somersaulting through circles of sea, left by a tunny's tail. Perhaps he wept at the sight. Who can say? No one remains to tell us. Our revels now are ended. These, our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into the air, into thin air, and like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and, like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep.
Romeo and Juliet. Once, in a sweltering Italian city named Verona, one man wronged another. It does not matter who wronged whom or how, enough that they remembered to hate one another, and taught their brothers and wives and children to hate each other's brothers and wives and children, each generation passing on its hatred to the next. In Verona, the Montagues hated the Capulets. The old men wrangled in the streets and lost their dignity. The young men brawled in public and lost their lives. Their stupidity infuriated the Duke of Verona. He passed edicts forbidding street affrays. The Montagues and Capulets bowed meek heads in front of him and swore things would be different in future, but inwardly they merely postponed their feud to a later date. Young Romeo was a Montague, so he and his friends naturally hated the Capulets. They welcomed the smallest opportunity for a fight, and when they were not fighting, they were falling in love. Romeo was forever falling in love, with a desperate fervour, though rarely for more than a week. His friends Benvolio and Mercutio were used to it. But on the subject of the latest divine Rosaline, Romeo was in danger of becoming a bore. He moped and sighed about the place and declared himself at death's door because Rosaline did not return his love. To cheer him up, Benvolio and Mercutio dragged him along to a party at the Capulet house. The fact that everyone wore carnival masks enabled them to gate-crash with ease, and it seemed clever to filch Capulet food and get merry on Capulet wine. The intention was that Romeo should see some new face to take his mind off Rosaline's. In the event, his well-meaning friends were to regret their success, for the face Romeo saw was that of Juliet, daughter of the Capulets. She was 14 and extremely beautiful. All Romeo's adolescent crushes, all his imaginary excursions into love, crumbled to nothing. They had all been rehearsals for this. Love at first sight. Love given and received in a single meeting of eyes. Without even knowing each other's name, Romeo and Juliet fell in love. As their fingers intertwined, so did their lives. With a flurry of ruffled feathers, the Montague intruders were spotted. Juliet's cousin Tybalt would gladly have run his sword through Romeo then and there, but for the laws of hospitality and the Duke's edict. As it was, he swore to cross swords with Romeo at the very next opportunity. Romeo was oblivious of the vexation he was causing. He left the house, but could not leave its grounds. The presence of Juliet held him there, like the cord which ties a hawk to the falconer's wrist. He waited under her balcony for a glimpse of her.
But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek.
Romeo was rewarded by hearing Juliet speak his name over and over. "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?" He spoke to her out of the darkness and climbed up to steal a kiss. There was no shyness between them, no elaborate courtship. Time was too pressing and the danger of being discovered too great. "Good night, good night. Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow." It was Juliet who proposed they marry next day. No one else in the world must know, except for the friar who was to marry them, and the go-between by whom Juliet sent word of where and when. The go-between was Juliet's old nurse, a jolly, rollicking woman as devoted to Juliet as mother and friend rolled together. During her long life, she had seen love in all its guises, and was still as melted and moved by it as a young girl. With her help, Juliet was able to arrange to meet Romeo at Friar Lawrence's cell in the monastery, where both were in the habit of going to confession. "My only love sprung from my only hate." The friar himself was touched with the same fond, sentimental faith in the power of love as the nurse. He agreed to perform the marriage, hoping that in some way it might put an end to the family's feuding. It would call for careful timing, though, to break the news that a Montague had secretly married a Capulet. Whistling and dancing with his shadow across Verona's marketplace, the blissfully happy Romeo overtook his friends Mercutio and Benvolio. He was in love with the whole world. Suddenly, though, his shadow collided with another, that of Juliet's cousin Tybalt, roaring boy and fighting cock of the Capulets. Tybalt was holding a drawn sword.
I'll teach you to come to our house uninvited, Romeo Montague.
But Tybalt did not receive the reaction he was expecting. There were no snarled insults, no braggartly threats given in exchange for his.
I don't want to fight you, Tybalt. I can't,
said Romeo.
You would understand if you knew. Oh, I do. You're a coward, I know that. Too scared to fight. No, Tybalt, on my oath. I can't explain why, but God knows I've more cause to love you than hate you this morning. Romeo.
His companion Mercutio was horrified.
What are you saying? Here's this filthy Capulet calling you out, and you tell him you won't fight with him. Well, if you won't, I will. No, you don't understand, Mercutio.
But Mercutio's sword was already drawn. If Romeo would not fight, then he would have to defend the honour of the Montagues himself. He was too disgusted with Romeo to pay him any more attention, and Tybalt was in no mood to listen either. Though Romeo ducked and dodged between them, pleaded with them to put up their swords, the blades clashed and the curses flew. Romeo dived between them and restrained Mercutio's sword arm. Tybalt seized the opportunity to lunge. The blade passed under Romeo's arm and pierced Mercutio in the heart. His dearest friend died in Romeo's arms, cursing Montagues and Capulets alike.
A plague! How both your houses!
Blinded with rage, Romeo snatched out his sword and ran Tybalt through, forgetting Juliet, forgetting the edict, forgetting what a price there would be to pay. Already the alarm bells were ringing. The city guard were on their way. Nothing remained but to run or face arrest. Romeo fled to the monastery, and there Friar Lawrence brought him the news that he was banished from Verona forever.
Leave Verona? Leave Juliet? I'd sooner the Duke had condemned me to death.
Friar Lawrence told him off roundly for such a foolish, defeatist attitude, and dispatched him to visit Juliet one last time before fleeing the city. Romeo hardly dared face her. Meeting the old nurse, he found her bitterly grieved by Tybalt's death. She had always adored the boy, the whole family had. Now all her bawdy jokes were extinguished, her face grown as grey as her hair, and if the nurse was so very altered by grief, Juliet too might have changed.
Does Juliet hate me for killing her cousin?
She hardly knows which to cry about more, Tybalt's death or your banishment, said the nurse, her eyes cold and embittered. But once they were together, Romeo and Juliet rebuilt heaven out of the ruins of the day. One night was theirs before Romeo was obliged to flee the city or die. But it was a long, sweet night, which increased their love still further. One life was ending, but another would soon begin for them outside Verona. Once reunited, they would rely solely on each other for their future happiness. So Juliet's parents, visiting her bedroom a few moments after Romeo's departure, seemed like intruders, strangers. "Your father, my dear, has arranged a day of happiness to mend all your heartache over Tybalt's death," said Juliet's mother. "Next Thursday morning, just a couple of days from now, my goodness, the Count of Paris will be waiting at the Church of St. Peter's to make you his bride. There now, what do you say to that?" "I say he shan't. I mean, he can't. No, never. It's not possible." Her parents' indulgent faces froze over. They called her ungrateful, willful, obstinate. When she dared not explain herself, her father flew into a rage and told her she would marry the Count or be turned out of the house disowned. In her desperation, Juliet ran to Friar Lawrence. "What shall I do? I'm already married to Romeo. I'd sooner die than marry Paris."
Die? Yes,
mused the friar.
and so you shall, my child. Or something like it, if you have the courage to do as I say.
He gave her a potion whose effect would be to suppress all signs of life without actually killing her.
Go home and tell your parents you are ready and content to marry the Count of Paris. Then, on Wednesday night, drink this potion. Your parents will come to wake you for your wedding, and, God pity them, think you dead. Your body will be carried on an open bier through the city, as Tybalt's was today, to the Capulet vault in the churchyard, and laid among your ancestors. I'll send word to Romeo to come at once. He'll be there at your side when you wake, and you can leave the city together. The world's larger than Verona, you know. There must be room in it somewhere for true lovers to be together.
This time Juliet could not even confide in her nurse. The contents of the bottle terrified her. She drank deeply even so. The shriek that went up in that bedroom next morning echoed through the streets and set all the starlings circling in a black cloud over the city. Oh, woe! Oh, woeful, woeful, woeful day! Most lamentable day! Most woeful day that ever I did behold! Oh, day! Oh, day! Oh, day! Oh, hateful day! Never was seen so black a day as this. Oh, woeful day! Oh, woeful day! Juliet lay on her bed, cold, white, and still, with no more sign of life than her cousin Tybalt when he was carried home from the marketplace. Friar Lawrence heard the weeping and comforted the distraught parents. But he did not weep. He congratulated himself that there was a letter even then speeding along the road towards Mantua, where Romeo sat waiting for news. It explained everything, the potion, the reason for it, the need for Romeo to return at once in secret and keep vigil in the tomb beside his sleeping wife. But the letter went astray. The messengers carrying it were detained by a plague scare on the road to Mantua, and the first and only message to reach Romeo was of Juliet's death. Nothing of the plot, the rendezvous, or of the remedy. He bought poison and rode back to Verona as fast as his horse would carry him. He found what he had no reason to disbelieve: the corpse of Juliet lying in her family's tomb.
Oh, my love, my wife, death that has sucked the honey of thy breath hath no power yet upon thy beauty. Thou art not conquered. Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there.
It was the work of a moment to drink down the poison and set off in pursuit of Juliet's soul on the starry climb to heaven. When Juliet awoke, she found Romeo lying by her side. His body was still a little warm from life, but touched by icy death. "What? Didn't you leave one drop for me?" she said reproachfully, holding up the empty poison bottle. Then she drew his dagger and quickly sank it in her heart. There were voices and footsteps outside, and she had no wish to be stopped in her pursuit of Romeo. Friar Lawrence would surely have done better to tell the truth, to have spoken up and said,
Juliet can't marry Paris. She's already married to a Montague.
But though he was cowardly and misguided in what he did, he proved right about one thing. The love of Romeo for Juliet did unite their families, not in the joys of a wedding, but in their inconsolable grief.
Where be these enemies? Capulet, Montague, see what a scourge is laid upon your hate, that heaven finds means to kill your joys with love.
As they stood in that vault and saw Juliet, lost to them twice over, and Romeo, banished not from Verona this time, but from the earth, their grief was too deep for thoughts of vendetta. Montague and Capulet shook hands in a pledge of peace. But the hands they clasped felt already as dusty and frail as those of the skeletons who watched from the shadowy shelves of the Capulet tomb.
A Midsummer Night's Dream. Something was wrong in the world of the fairies. Rain filled the ditches, swamped the fields, rotted the crops, and ran like tears down the abandoned village maypole. All this in July, in Greece. There was discord among the spirits, a falling out between the king and the queen of the fairies, over which of them should have a little Indian changeling boy for a page. While they sulked and fumed and stamped their fairy feet, the rain kept pouring. There was every chance it would still be raining on the wedding day of Duke Theseus. The Duke was due to be married on Midsummer's Day, and the citizens of Athens could think of little else, unless it was the weather, or their own dreams of marriage. Big, buxom Helena dreamed of marrying Demetrius. But there was no hope of that, for Demetrius was besotted with her friend, little dark-haired Hermia, and Hermia's father approved. It was all settled. Her father had told Hermia to marry Demetrius. The fact that Hermia was in love with Lysander was of no importance. Hermia stood up to her father and refused Demetrius point blank, but was told, "Marry him, or I'll put you in a nunnery, and you can go without a husband altogether." As a result, little Hermia and Lysander took things into their own hands. On Midsummer's Eve, they eloped. They walked off into the forest, determined to be together come what may. The course of true love never did run smooth. The only person who knew they had gone was Hermia's lifelong friend, Helena. Hoping that such behaviour might change Demetrius's mind about whom he wished to marry, Helena went to Demetrius and told tales.
Lysander and Hermia have run off together. Didn't I always tell you I loved you more than she did?
She did not get the reaction she'd hoped for. Demetrius promptly drew his sword and strode after the lovers, swearing vengeance on Lysander. Helena was left to stride along behind him, reminding him 10 times hourly how she loved and adored him. It was not what Demetrius wanted to hear. "Leave me alone, can't you? I've told you till I'm hoarse I can't stand the sight of you."
"And I can't bear to be away from you,"
wailed Helena. They crashed into the forest like a stampede of cattle, disturbing the fairies, whose nerves were already jangled. Oberon, king of the fairies, and Titania, his queen, had met by accident in a moonlit glade. "Ill met by moonlight," proud Titania. Their quarrel had flared up again. After the skirmishing was over, 1,000 gossamer wings still trembled with shock in the pallid starlight. Oberon, who had lost the skirmish, decided to punish Titania for again refusing him the Indian boy. He dispatched Puck, his master of mischief, to fetch a certain potent herb for the sake of its magic. Meanwhile, a group of working men came crashing like a caravan of donkeys into the forest glade. They were looking for somewhere quiet to rehearse a play in honour of the Duke's wedding. They had chosen something suitably romantic, the story of Pyramus and Thisbe. In the play, thwarted lovers arrange to meet by moonlight. The fair maiden is frightened off by a lion, and the handsome hero, thinking the lion has eaten her, kills himself. They thought it just the thing for a wedding. There was Peter Quince the carpenter, Flute the bellows mender, Snug the joiner, Starveling the tailor, and Snout the tinker. And, of course, there was Nick Bottom the weaver, whose enthusiasm almost made up for their joint lack of acting skills. What with Bottom, who would have liked to play all the parts himself, Snug, who had no memory for lines, and Flute, who spoke his all of a lump, Peter Quince found directing drama was not as easy as he'd first supposed. Oberon waited a few minutes for Puck to circle the earth and bring him the magic herb.
"I'll put a girdle around the earth in 40 minutes.
His peace was shattered by Demetrius, hotly pursued by Helena. Still Helena was protesting her love, and still Demetrius was spurning it. The fairy king, as he eavesdropped, was moved by Helena's distress. "I'll soon put this to rights," he thought. Then, like a shooting star, Puck returned from his errand, a dart of movement glimpsed in the corner of an eye. Armed with the magical purple-petalled flower, Oberon squeezed some of its juice into the eyes of his sleeping queen. "Whatever you see when you open your eyes," he whispered with malicious pleasure, "however grotesque, however foul, love it with all your heart and soul. Let it be something horrible." Then, like the spotted snake, he glided silently away and told Puck to do the same for Demetrius, to make him love that big, neglected girl who followed him about. Unfortunately, Puck, not knowing there were two Athenian boys in the grip of midsummer madness, found the wrong twosome, and squeezed the flower into Lysander's eyes. Helena tripped over the friend's lover in the dark, mistook him for dead, and pummeled at him anxiously until he woke up. So as he opened his eyes, he saw through purple mists a picture of perfection. He leapt up and embraced Helena's knees, pressed his face to her thigh, and begged leave to worship her.
Oh, how could you?
She cried, stamping on his foot.
I know it's Hermia you love, but to make fun of me at a time like this.
And having as hot a temper as she had a passion, she stalked off, while Lysander tottered after her, love-struck. Hermia, woken by a nightmare and finding herself alone, cast about for her Lysander, calling his name. No answer. What could have happened to him? She rushed into the dark embrace of the wood, as afraid for her lover as for herself. "Wait behind that bush, Bottom," said Peter Quince. "When you hear your cue, come out and say your lines." Bottom picked his way through the brambles, muttering his lines to himself to get them off by heart, and squatted down behind the bush. Spiders and beetles, slow worms and hedgehogs came trekking by, casting their shadows like outgrown chrysalids. Then Bottom's ears started to itch. For that master of mischief, Puck, seeing this great gangling lummock, littering up the fairy woodland had been too much of a temptation. He had given Bottom the head of a donkey, and when Bottom answered his cue and stepped out from behind the bush, his fellow actors took one look at him, screamed, and fled, with an invisible Puck hard on their heels, to chase them through bogs and briars.
What hempen homespuns have we swaggering here, so near the cradle of the fairy queen?
Oh, har, 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 very funny. Think you'll make an ass out of me, do you, with your fooling about? Well, I'm not bothered, said Bottom loudly.
Still, to be alone in the middle of a wood, in the middle of the night, was a little unnerving, even for a man of Bottom's calibre, and he began singing to raise his spirits. The particular spirit he raised was Titania, queen of the fairies. She opened her eyes, saw the see-sawing, hee-hawing head of a donkey right overhead, and cried,
"Oh, exquisite creature, where did you come from? Let me touch you. Tell me your heart's not given to another. Grant me the right to love you, adore you, dote on you. Mine ear is much enamoured of thy note, so is mine eye enthralled to thy shape."
The donkey blinked at her, dilating its big, wet nostrils and grinding its yellow teeth.
Well, I don't rightly know why you'd want to go and do a thing like that,
Bottom drawled. But he didn't stop her stroking his ears. It was a very agreeable sensation. Bottom was puzzled to be loved by a fairy, but, as with his acting, he had a good enough opinion of himself not to question his luck. When Titania summoned her fairy helpers, Peace Blossom and Moth, Cobweb and Mustard Seed, to weave him flower garlands, bring him nectar and scratch his head, he didn't complain about that either. Puck saw it all and reported back to his master the effects of the purple juice. Oberon was delighted, until two Athenian lovers trailed by again beneath the tree where Oberon sat. Demetrius had briefly shaken off Helena and even managed to find Hermia, his runaway fiancée, wandering alone in the woods. But he was no better off for having found her.
"You've killed him, haven't you?"
She greeted him.
"You've killed my daring Lysander while he slept. How low can a man stoop? Where have you hidden his dear body? Tell me!"
Then she ran away from him and instantly and completely lost her way.
"This is the girl I saw,"
whispered Puck.
"but not the man."
"Fool," said Oberon. "You've squeezed juice in the wrong pair of eyes, you silly sprite. Go and make amends immediately." So Puck went and dropped love juice in Demetrius's eyes, as Oberon had originally intended. He even managed to do it just as Helena, with Lysander close behind, caught up with her idol again. Always unloved before, Helena soon found herself with not one, but two men mooning after her. Both Demetrius and Lysander, to her total bewilderment, were hurling compliments at her and dogging her through the woods in hope of a kind word. They didn't get one. She naturally assumed they were both making fun of her.
Oh, spite! Oh, hell! I see you are all bent to set against me for your merriment. Everyone knows you love Hermia,
she retorted to Lysander's protestations of love. Oh, her? Demetrius can have her. No, said Demetrius. I'm quite content. You eloped with her. You have her. No, you. I found someone far better, declared Lysander. Their raised voices guided little lost Hermia into their moonlit clearing. She's yours, Demetrius was shouting. No, she's not. She's yours, Lysander shouted back. Helena loves me. She's always said so. That was before you contracted to marry Hermia. I told you before, leave that minimus out of this. Hermia's jaw dropped as she realized that the men were talking about her.
Oh, you sneak thief! You temptress!
She shrieked, running at Helena and jumping up as if to scratch out her eyes.
What have you done to them? You've bewitched them. You're trying to steal my Lysander!
Towering over her, equally angry, Helena retaliated.
What? You too? Are you going to join in this cruel, wicked joke after all our childhood years together?
Meanwhile, the rivals in love, Demetrius and Lysander, had their hands on their sword hilts and were starting to talk of fighting to the death for the right to marry Helena. On a branch overhead, swinging his feet, Puck the mischief-maker looked on in amazement.
Lord, what fools these mortals be,
he whispered to the fairy king. Oberon kicked him off his perch, so that Puck rattled down through the trees like a falling pine cone. This is all you're doing. Use the love flower to put things to rights, or by morning we shall have dead Athenians strewn round the wood like dirty washing. Go after them, roll up the moonlight and paint the night blacker, so that they miss each other in the dark. Lead them to opposite ends of the wood, where they can't hurt each other. In the meantime, I shall undo the charm on my proud Titania. An hour earlier, walking in the wood, the fairy king had found his queen busy festooning the donkey-headed bottom with flowers and jewels.
Come, sit thee down upon this flowery bed, while I thy amiable cheeks do coy, and stick musk roses in thy sleek, smooth head, and kiss thy fair large ears, my gentle joy.
So obsessed was she with her new love that she had lost all interest in the little Indian boy.
Take him,
she said dreamily, and Oberon had simply carried the boy away. He found his joy in winning marred, however, by the sight of Bottom still being caressed and garlanded. He didn't like to admit it, but he was a little jealous of Bottom the ass. Be as you were, see as you saw. Fairy, awake, and see your mistake. With a second neutralizing flower, Oberon anointed the eyes of his queen. Flies circled Bottom's long ears and crawled onto the cheek of the fairy queen. It had stopped raining. The fairies no longer wished to be at war. When Titania awoke, the face she saw above her was Oberon's, and she liked the expression in his eye.
I had the oddest dream,
she murmured.
I dreamed I was in love with an ass.
There's your donkey beside you, said Oberon. And Titania gave a shriek of horror at the sight of Bottom, ears aflop, nose aflicker, dreaming of oats and carrots. Come away, said her fairy true love. The day's dawning. Away, fairies, away, elves and goblins. Let the wood stir and the dew glisten. Let the birds sing and the creatures listen. So the day dawned fair, after all, for Duke Theseus's wedding. The sun shone hot, the wet ground steamed. The weather vanes turned to the west, and the clenched flowers unfolded like fists. Nature and the fairies were at peace once more. Helena, I love you, said Demetrius.
Who am I to argue?
Said Helena. Hermia, I love you, said Lysander.
I should think so too.
Said Hermia.
At last, that's settled.
Said Puck, discarding crushed flowers. He was just wiping his purple-stained fingers through his hair when the ground shook and a clamour of huntsmen galloped into the wood. Demetrius drew Helena close. Lysander shielded Hermia in his arms, but the leading huntsman reined in his horse just in time to avoid them. It was the Duke Theseus, celebrating his wedding day with a dawn hunt. Behind him rode a dozen Athenian noblemen, as well as his African bride-to-be, Hippolyta. Hermia's father was there. "Hermia, what's the meaning of this?" he demanded. "I warned you. Submit to marriage with Demetrius or be shut up in holy orders. And you, Demetrius, is this any way for a betrothed man to behave? Let go of that woman." The Duke interrupted him. "There's a superstition that if unmarried maids or men go walking in the woods on Midsummer's Eve, they'll meet their true loves. These lovers seem to have done that, and they must have what Midsummer gave them. Today in the temple, when Hippolyta and I make our vows, let these couples be married too, and may the fairies bless us all. Thank the gods, it stopped raining."
"Most fair Pyramus!"
A dishevelled workman with straws in his beard stumbled out from behind a bush. The company stared at him, and he stared back, clearly expecting someone else. "What did you say, fellow?"
"That's my line. That's what I have to say when I come on. Must have fell asleep back there. Now I come to remember I did have the oddest dream."
Bottom's speech petered out.
"My line, sir, for the play, sir. At the wedding... Where did Peter Quince get to?"
Bottom scratched his head and found, to his great surprise, a daisy chain over one ear. The merry and regrettable tragedy of Pyramus and Thisbe was the highlight of the wedding feast. Everyone forgot their lines. The lion apologized for roaring. The heroine had a 3-day growth of beard. The moon was so burdened down with props that he clattered across the stage like a tinker's handcart, dragging a stuffed dog behind him on a piece of string. The wall held up 2 rude fingers to represent a hole, and the hero,
"Now I'll kill myself,"
took 43 lines,
"Now I die,"
to expire,
"Now I'm dead,"
after stabbing himself,
"Dead, dead,"
in the armpit,
"Now my soul has fled,"
with a wooden sword. The audience fell off their benches laughing, which came as a surprise to the actors. But it seemed to suit the Duke very well, for he awarded a purse of gold to every man jack. After the brides and bridegrooms, the guests and the actors, the servants and the townspeople had gone to their beds, windows opened on a perfect balmy night. Titania and Oberon led their fairy band in and out of the houses. They laid their blessing on every eyelid and on every heart, leaving the silent rhymes of their magic verse written on the moon-white air, like footprints on a fall of summer snow. I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows, quite over-canopied with luscious woodbine, with sweet musk roses and with eglantine. There sleeps Titania some time of the night, lulled in these flowers with dances and delight.